This is the most populous city in the United States. It is also home to a lot of rats, about 3 million of them.
New York City has a rat problem that has outlasted mayors, wars, and centuries of extermination attempts. Estimates place the city's rat population somewhere around 3 million animals, though anyone who has worked in pest control will tell you that number is a guess dressed up as a fact. Rats don't fill out census forms. What the city actually counts are complaints, the calls that come in when someone sees a rat crossing a subway platform or scurrying along a curb. For every one of those calls, wildlife biologists suspect many more sightings simply never get reported. The true number moving through basements, alleys, and subway tunnels every night has always been unknowable. What is knowable is that the city has spent enormous amounts of money trying to bring that number down, and for 3 centuries, almost none of it has worked. The story of how rats got to New York in the first place is not complicated. Norway rats crossed the Atlantic in the holds of merchant ships during the colonial era, riding alongside grain, cloth, and other cargo. Once they reached the docks of a growing port city, they found exactly what they needed: shelter, waste, and an endless supply of food discarded by a human population that was multiplying just as fast as they were. There was no containing them. By the time city officials in the 18th and 19th centuries recognized rats as a public health problem, the animals had already burrowed into the foundations of the city, both literally and figuratively. What makes Norway rats such a stubborn adversary isn't just their reproductive speed, although that alone is staggering. A single breeding pair, given a year and no interference, can theoretically produce a lineage numbering in the thousands once every generation of offspring is factored in. It's their intelligence that makes them almost impossible to eliminate. Rats are cautious, observant animals. They test new objects in their environment before interacting with them, which is why a fresh trap placed in a rat's path will often sit untouched for days. They appear to communicate danger to one another, avoiding areas where other rats have died from poison. And they learn human patterns quickly enough to shift their own activity to the hours when exterminators are least likely to be out. In short, rats in New York have spent 300 years becoming extremely good at surviving whatever the city throws at them from the ground. That's part of what makes the recent trend so strange. Over the last several years, pest control data in a number of New York neighborhoods has started showing something researchers didn't expect: sustained, measurable drops in rat activity in specific zones, without any city program targeting those blocks specifically. No new poison campaign. No new sanitation initiative. Just fewer rats, month after month, in corridors that had been rat hotspots for years. At first, the pattern looked like statistical noise. Rat populations fluctuate with the seasons. They tend to peak after the spring and autumn breeding cycles and dip slightly during the coldest stretches of winter, when rats spend more time underground. Anyone who studies this data learns to expect a certain rhythm to the numbers. But when a handful of specific block clusters kept showing declines that didn't match that seasonal rhythm, drops that persisted through the months when rat activity should have been climbing, it became harder to write off as coincidence. Urban wildlife researchers who started digging into the anomaly ruled out the obvious explanations one at a time. Weather hadn't changed dramatically enough to explain it. Sanitation schedules in the affected blocks were the same as everywhere else. Demographic shifts didn't line up with the pattern. Even a change in how residents were reporting sightings didn't account for the size of the decline. Whatever was suppressing the rat population in these specific pockets of the city wasn't showing up in any of the usual variables. The answer turned out to be sitting in plain sight, just not at street level. When researchers began looking upward instead of downward, they found something that had quietly become part of New York's skyline over the past few decades: birds of prey, and a lot of them. Peregrine falcons are the most visible of the 3. These birds vanished from most of the eastern United States by the middle of the 20th century, largely because of DDT, a pesticide widely used in agriculture, and mosquito control starting in the late 1940s. DDT accumulated in the food chain and interfered with calcium production in birds of prey, causing eggshells to become so thin that they cracked under the weight of an incubating parent. Peregrine populations collapsed across the country, and the skies above cities like New York, which had once hosted nesting pairs on natural cliff faces, went quiet. The ban on DDT in the early 1970s, combined with captive breeding and reintroduction programs, slowly began to reverse that collapse. What nobody fully anticipated was how well peregrines would adapt to cities. Skyscrapers, it turns out, are an excellent substitute for the cliffs peregrines have nested on for millions of years. Tall, vertical, hard to reach, and offering a clear view for hunting. New York's dense population of pigeons provided no shortage of prey. Slowly, without much fanfare, the city became one of the most peregrine-dense urban environments in North America, with dozens of nesting pairs now holding territory on bridges, water towers, and building ledges across all 5 boroughs. Peregrines hunt primarily at dusk, which happens to be exactly when Norway rats are most active on the surface, moving between burrows and food sources under cover of fading light. A peregrine's hunting dive is one of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom, closing in on prey at speeds that can exceed 100 miles per hour. The strike is nearly silent and over in seconds, fast enough that a rat, an animal whose entire survival strategy is built around threats approaching from the ground, has essentially no ability to detect or evade an attack coming almost straight down from above. But peregrines are only part of the picture. Great horned owls have re-established themselves in the city's larger green spaces, Central Park, Prospect Park, and several of the larger parks scattered across the outer boroughs, in numbers that surprised even people who track the city's bird populations closely. Owls hunt at night, picking up where peregrine activity tapers off after dusk. Their flight is famously silent, the result of specialized feather structures that break up the turbulence normally created by a bird's wings moving through air. A great horned owl can locate prey by sound alone in near total darkness and strike without giving the animal below any warning at all. Combined with the peregrines covering the evening hours, that leaves rats with a shrinking window of time during which surface movement doesn't come with a serious risk of being killed from above. Then there's the third predator, one that doesn't rely on darkness or speed so much as an ability rats have no way of countering: red-tailed hawks, which now nest across the city on buildings and infrastructure in numbers well beyond their historical presence, hunt during daylight hours. Hawks, like several other birds of prey, can see into the ultraviolet spectrum, and rat urine, which rats use to mark travel routes for themselves and other rats, reflects ultraviolet light strongly enough that it effectively glows to a hawk's eyes. Rather than searching randomly, hawks appear to be able to follow rat scent trails visually from the air, turning the exact behavior rats rely on to navigate their own territory into a map for the birds hunting them. Put together, the 3 predators divide the day into overlapping shifts. Peregrines take dusk, owls take the deep night, and hawks take the daylight hours, leaving very little time in any 24-hour period when a rat can move across open ground without the possibility of an aerial predator overhead. In the neighborhoods where all 3 species hold territory, researchers have found some of the steepest and most consistent declines in rat activity anywhere in the city's records. What makes this especially striking is the contrast with everything the city itself has tried. Human intervention against rats has almost always followed the same pattern: target a zone, clear it out through poison, traps, or habitat removal, and move on. The problem is that clearing a zone creates a vacuum, and rats from surrounding, untreated areas move in to fill it almost immediately. Pest control professionals have a name for this: the rebound effect, and it explains why so many expensive rat reduction campaigns over the decades have shown short-term results that quietly evaporate within a year or 2. A multi-million-dollar initiative launched in 2017, aimed at 3 of the city's most rat-dense neighborhoods, used everything from carbon monoxide pumped into burrow systems to networks of new trash containers and increased pickup schedules. It produced real short-term reductions, but rat colonies are more resilient than a single tactic can account for. Their burrow systems often include sealed inner chambers that gas treatments never reach, and colonies that survive one wave of intervention tend to rebuild. Birds of prey don't work that way. A nesting pair doesn't clear a territory and leave. It holds that territory, hunting the same corridors night after night, indefinitely, for as long as the nest remains active. There's no vacuum for other rats to fill, because the pressure never lets up in the first place. That sustained, uninterrupted presence, something no city-run program has ever managed to replicate, appears to be the single biggest reason certain neighborhoods are seeing rat numbers actually stay down instead of just dipping and rebounding. None of this happened because anyone planned it. The return of peregrine falcons to New York had nothing to do with rats. It was about protecting a species from extinction after decades of pesticide damage. The reason great horned owls expanded into city parks likely has more to do with an abundance of prey and available roosting habitat than any deliberate ecological strategy. Red-tailed hawks adapted to city buildings because building ledges function similarly enough to cliffs and tall trees. Every piece of this recovery was driven by the bird's own needs, decades removed from anyone thinking about the rat problem at all. It's only in hindsight, once researchers started comparing raptor territory maps against decades of rat complaint data, that the connection became obvious. There's also something worth sitting with in just how invisible this has all been to the people living underneath it. Millions of New Yorkers walk beneath active hunting territories every single day without any idea that a falcon, an owl, or a hawk might be perched 60 feet above their heads at that exact moment. The predator-prey drama playing out over the rooftops of Manhattan and Brooklyn happens almost entirely without human witnesses. In a handful of seconds, most people are looking at their phones or the sidewalk instead of the sky. The question this raises for the city is one worth asking seriously. What happens if this quiet, accidental system stops working? Peregrine falcons, owls, and hawks are still vulnerable to the same kinds of environmental pressures that nearly wiped peregrines out the first time. Pesticide exposure, habitat loss, disease, and the slow erosion of the pigeon and rodent populations they depend on for food. Unlike a city-funded rat reduction program, there's no budget line protecting the system, no agency specifically tasked with maintaining it, and very little public awareness that it even exists. For now, though, the pattern holds. In the parts of the city where peregrines, owls, and hawks share overlapping territory, the rat population, an animal that spent 3 centuries learning to outsmart every trap, poison, and extermination tactic humans could invent, has run into a threat it has no defense against because it never had the chance to evolve one. The rats that arrived in the holds of 18th century cargo ships never encountered a peregrine falcon diving out of a New York sky, and neither did generations of their descendants, right up until the birds quietly came back. No warning system was ever passed down for a threat that wasn't there for 250 years. The gap in the rats' survival instincts wasn't a flaw in their intelligence. It was simply a threat the city's skies hadn't posed in living memory until it did again. 3 species of birds, with no coordination, no funding, and no human plan behind any of it, may be doing more to hold New York's rat population in check than every extermination effort the city has ever paid for. The next question is whether anyone in a position to protect that quiet, accidental system realizes what's actually at stake if it ever disappears.